Good afternoon. Welcome to O'Neill's 2023 Signature Scholars Research Program student presentations. This is the second year of the program, but these are the first students to complete both years, the Foundational Methods course and the year-long Research and Writing Intensive. SSRP is a rigorous and challenging process, and they have certainly earned our congratulations. SSRP offers academically strong, intrinsically motivated students the opportunity to immerse themselves in a topic of particular interest. It is like programs in other exceptional independent schools around the world. I was part of one of the original programs like SSRP, and O'Neill's program is unique in that it allows more student choice in areas of study, and our Foundational Methods course, mentoring, and director are stronger than I have encountered. As you may know, the O'Neill School was awarded a substantial E.E. Ford traditional grant to expand our current research programs and resources to impact even more students and faculty on campus and throughout the Sandhills. The E.E. Ford's foundation mission is to improve independent schools and encourage promising practices. We are proud that O'Neill is developing programs of significance for our community and that our school is being recognized with this notable award. SSRP was a big part of the grant process. Faculty research grants, a speaker series, and summer programs to provide O'Neill's resources for area teachers and students are all opportunities the E.E. Ford grant and the matching funds we will raise will provide. Our goal is to provide the opportunity for many more to gain the research skills and satisfaction of developing a level of expertise in an area of scholarly interest. Today's SSRP presenters all exhibit the qualities and have earned the title scholar. You've all heard me say this before. Broadly, scholars love to learn. They engage with their teachers and with other students. They're excited to learn the answers and to apply their knowledge. Scholars also share their ideas like this evening. They go beyond the normal or average expectations to understand or learn or question even more. They are excited by challenges and know that it is essential to learn from our mistakes. And scholars appreciate and respect the intellect of others. Thank you all for being here to support these special students and this unique program. While the current scholars are finishing their work tonight, others are just beginning. The class of 2024 SSRP Scholars, and if you would please stand, include Caroline Acker, Audrey Kim, Tyler Pastor, Luke Harper, and Rachel Wolf. Congratulations. And this is a two-year program. The class of 2025 SSRP Scholars are Amy Batterjee, Campbell Medford, Catherine Fensterly, and Abby Jones. Congratulations. I know you and we all have a lot to look forward to. Dr. Camastra has been instrumental in developing the SSRP program and in the vision for the E.E. Ford grant proposal. O'Neill is grateful for her thoughtful work in launching the program and leading our students through this special process. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Camastra to be in our program.
Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Mr. Elmore, for a great introduction. So I am the director of the Signature Scholars Research Program, SSRP, also the English Department Chair. And the SSRP seniors comprise these, Emma and Max, the inaugural cohort of the program. We all make mistakes, you see, it's just to go with that. to roll with it. Part of it, anyway. They do comprise the inaugural cohort of the program. They are the first to complete the 2-year course of study. They have read and written a lot. They have worked with faculty mentors. They've given several small presentations, and they've forged connections with experts in their field. The culminating project for SSRP is a paper of at least 10,000 words or a portfolio of relative weight and value. What they present to you now is the product of 2 years' worth of independent reading, writing, archival work, and investigation. They have achieved an extraordinary level of scholarship and will share some of what they've learned with you now. I say they will share some because the nature of these presentations requires them to distill their findings into small elliptical bits of information that a lay audience can understand. Their knowledge far surpasses the talks that you're about to hear. But this is what makes SSRP so dynamic. The breadth and depth of their work means that it will live beyond O'Neill, finding new iteration and purpose in college, in graduate school, and of course in their personal lives. This evening's symposium is designed for the O'Neill community to witness and celebrate the incredible accomplishments of Max and Emma. I use the word accomplishment deliberately. In a recent New York Times opinion piece, Adam Gopnik distinguishes between accomplishment and achievement. He writes that our world conspires to denigrate accomplishment in favor of the rote work of achievement. The former grows from intrinsic desire, while the latter focuses on completing a task imposed from the outside, according to Gopnik. Max and Emma decided to pursue a personal interest apart from any mandated curricular objective or goal. Simply put, they had questions for which they wanted to pursue the answers. Watching their pursuit has given me incredible joy since they were among the first students that I taught at O'Neill when I arrived 6 years ago. Then seventh graders, they were inquisitive and curious, kind and empathetic, and they still are. Goodness. There is a nice circularity to this evening's event as I watch them prepare for the next chapter in their lives. I hope you enjoy their presentations as much as I've enjoyed teaching and learning alongside them. I will introduce our speakers in turn. Emma will go first, and after her presentation, we'll have a short Q&A and then a short break for you to grab some refreshments before we begin with Max's presentation. Emma Grace Sager has been attending O'Neill since the 5th grade. She is an avid reader with a lifelong interest in history, evidenced by her first pet, Toby Tut, named for the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. At school, she is the president of the Women's Empowerment Club and involved in multiple varsity sports. Her interest in the Victorian period was sparked with the reading and subsequent obsession with Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. In the fall, she will be attending Washington College and majoring in history and economics. Welcome, Emma.
Going to work with me today. Hi all, I'm Emma. Ooh, I'm losing my laptop. My research was focused on Victorian women, specifically the issues of economics and perception in defining England's women. So this was kind of my guiding principle as I was going through my research, that through an economic exploration of change in politics, sexual expression, and perception, a realistic idea of what a 19th century English woman was can be uncovered. This research subverts the modern understanding of the Victorian period as stagnant and unchanging. So, just a little context for the period I'm working in. The Victorian period was named for Queen Victoria, pictured here. It was characterized by Sally Michaels as a period of prudery, hypocrisy, sexual repression, and rigid social control. So, I was just wondering, as we began this, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Victorian? Yeah, Lauren? Yeah. Architecture. Yeah. High collars. High collars. So yeah, these all kind of come out of this idea of prudery and very conservative ideals. So I characterize the Victorian period as the last conservative age. We understand it in the context of transcontinental exchange. So what was happening in England was happening in America. So they're tied together in this period. So following the Victorian era, it's perhaps characterized as extremely conservative because it's followed by the Roaring Twenties, shorter skirts, things like that. So it's understood as the last truly conservative age. So in my research, I distilled the Victorian life to three main topics, that of politics, sexual expression, and perception. And each of these three factors of life, I assigned a foundational character to each of them. So politics is the suffragette, women fighting for the rights to vote for women, a prostitute, self-explanatory, and a housewife, also self-explanatory. So my first focus was in politics. So the suffragette's the foundational character for this part of life. Just a little context for the Victorian period. There were expanded democratic rights for male citizens, so it seemed with every election there were less and less property rights. So there was just a growing sense of the democratic spirit in England that had been developing over the last few centuries as a social trend. And then there were cultural developments like the printing press that allowed for easier access to media and growth in literacy rates that allowed for easier expression of political ideas. So the two of these culminated in the suffragette movement of women seeing this growth of democratic ability and seeing easier ways to share their own political ideas and kind of forged the suffragette movement. So Emmeline Pankhurst is perhaps the most well-known suffragette. She published an autobiography detailing her time as a suffragette, including her arrest, her ideas, My Own Story in 1914. On the eve of the First World War, you'll see that it's not in the Victorian period, men were taking up arms against each other, perhaps the most uncivilized act of warfare, and they were turning to their women and calling on them to take up the work of keeping civilization alive. So basically, Emmeline Pankhurst was arguing that if women could be running the society while men were off fighting wars, then they should have some say in the society that ruled them. She also advocated for a militant approach, which is more aggressive approach as opposed to a peaceful civil protest. In America, we often think of civil protest and marches in the streets, hunger strikes, that sort of thing, but they were much more aggressive with their political thoughts. So, as I said, Emmeline Pankhurst, perhaps the most important, worked after the turn of the century. So women did not get the right to vote in England until the Equal Franchise Act of 1928. It's really important to understand that though it was not won in the Victorian period, suffrage was based entirely in Victorian ideals. So a lot of the motivations for female suffrage was the economic motivation behind it. So the rich wanted to maintain their wealth, and they wanted to have a say in how the country was spending their wealth. And then it also maintained the status quo within the class system. We can understand now that the people that were out fighting for the right to vote would not have included the lower class. This was a lot of upper and middle class women that were highly educated that wanted to maintain their importance in society. So suffrage media. I had the ability to go and do international archival research at the National Archives in Kew in the United Kingdom. So this picture is a stamp that would have been on a pamphlet of sorts, which kind of speaks to the mass media factor in suffrage. And then this is a newspaper clipping that details a woman scaling a barrier to to get into the House of Parliament, and then getting caught. And so this kind of demonstrated that militant approach. They weren't just standing out in the streets holding banners, they were scaling government buildings. So some other things from the archives. This is perhaps my favorite story that I've heard from this. A woman was found in a ventilation shaft. So this was from a police report sent to the commissioner, but I will read just an excerpt from it. On opening the small glass paneled door of a new pole ventilation shaft, they found a woman concealed therein and replied to questions. She gave her name as Emily Davidson and stated that she was a suffragette and that it was her intention to gain access to the house in order to ask a question. So this was a woman, a fine Victorian woman, who shimmied herself into a ventilation shaft, stood onto a ladder so no one opening the door could find her, and was trying to gain access to one of the most important government buildings in England. So, this is some other militant suffrage examples. One of the most popular trends was chucking bricks at government buildings, and oftentimes these women would be breaking glass panes, and as opposed to the fine that was pretty minuscule, she would elect to spend time in jail to make a political statement. So this just kind of shows you that these women were working in civil disobedience in a very outspoken way and perhaps subverts how we might understand the suffrage movement. So, the pushback to female suffrage is, one, the fact that it would interrupt the natural system. Human nature is to keep things going as they are, so just change in that would make it uncomfortable. But then also, suffrage was opening the door to any assertion of female power. So we understand now that the vote of an individual doesn't really do much, and it obviously would not upset the entire social balance, but it would open the door for her to assert more power in more places in her life. So we find this assertion of power in the discussion of sexual expression. So the foundational character for this part is that of the prostitute. It's important to understand that the prostitute was understood through upper and middle class perception. She did not have the luxury of explaining herself to others. She was not publishing the media that surrounded suffrage or surrounded prostitutes. And she was characterized as sex-obsessed and set on ruining the moral purity of their community. So she was a manifestation of the upper and middle class anxieties at the time. So the life of a prostitute was not one that any woman would subject herself to. It's important to understand that although it may have been characterized like that, no prostitute was doing this for the love of the game. She lived with a lack of social safeguards. She lived with a lack of social safeguards. The illegal nature of her work made it so violence done against prostitutes was often ignored by the police, and sometimes the police were the perpetrators of that violence. There was regular violence against them. One of the most important, perhaps the first, true crime case is that of Jack the Ripper, that his 5 victims were prostitutes. There was no access to effective birth control, so these women were more likely to have unsafe abortions or be forced to have a child with somebody she did not know. She had no means of supporting herself, so she obviously could not support a child. And then she lived with social and religious condemnation. So in such a conservative period, we can probably rationalize that religion would be incredibly important. So in prostitutes and religion, it's important to understand that the Victorian religion was characterized as quasi-fundamentalist and concerned less with doctrine and the forms of worship than with the way men should live. So basically, what this means is that in the Victorian period, it doesn't really matter what you're doing those 2 hours in church. It matters more what you're doing with the rest of your life and how that builds up your moral character. So there is a fair bit of hypocrisy in the upper class's anxieties with prostitution and sexual expression. So the Mosher survey was conducted by Cecilia Mosher in 1892, and it questioned well-educated middle and upper class women. We don't have the names of many of these women, but they were friends and acquaintances of Mosher. So the survey included questions about frequency, ideal amount of involvement per month, and thoughts on the necessity for sex. So as opposed to the view that sex was only for the need to conceive a child, this revealed that the upper class women were viewing it as a thing that they wanted for pleasure, which kind of flips the idea that the lower class was sex obsessed on its head. It reveals the middle and upper class feelings toward sexual expression within their own lives. So we see that it doesn't really matter what they think is going on in their lives. It matters what they think, and what is what they think is going around in other people's groups. So this is just a piece of Mosher data. We see that, I can't move, sorry. We see that this was collected from women that were in their 30s, would likely be done having children, and most often were having, or their ideal amount would be a few times a month. And then this would be contemporary woman. It was a study from the 90s. And it just shows that women were not just engaging in intercourse for the need to reproduce children. And there was a bit of hypocrisy in that. So the Victorians did not take issue with sexual involvement so much as they took issue with sexual expression. So basically what this means is that it didn't really matter what you were doing in your own life. It mattered what other people thought you were doing. So this brings us to the idea of perception and how you live your life and how other people think you live your life, which I think is probably the most important part of Victorian life. Perception. So our foundational character for this section is that of the housewife. She was of the middle class most often, and she was the center of the household. She would be running the household. She would be doing all the things you would expect a housewife to do, making sure there was dinner on the table, making sure the children got a bath, cleaning the house, things like that. But she was also the moral center of the household. So she would be making sure everyone went to church on Sunday and would be raising her children up to be upstanding members of society. Her role in society was unique from the other social classes. This had more to do with her being in the middle class than her being a housewife. So I'll get into that later. So here we find the Englishwoman's Domestic magazine. Here was a cover from one of them. It contained sort of everything a housewife would need to know and shows us what a housewife would have been expected to know. So it contained domestic advice, entertainment, and essays containing social commentary. So some of the most interesting excerpts were How to Sweeten Rancid Butter, Instructions on Dancing the Polka, and essays on the merit of female education, and also the idea of French women working, which was very scandalous. So this was just kind of the gamut of what a housewife would have been expected to do. So here we get to the middle class. The majority of housewives were middle class, and the middle class today is not a very foreign concept, but it found its origin right before the Victorian period and was the most populous group of classes. It was unique in financial history because this was a group of people that had to work for a living and would obtain some sort of luxury, but would have to work to maintain this luxury. It found its origin in the economic change that preceded the Victorian period, but it was now the largest class, so there was a bit of tension between that and finding a place for the middle class in society. So, different classes had different expectations, as you can imagine. So the lower class, and a wife in the lower class, she would be exempt from most domestic expectation because it was unreasonable for her to stay home. It would be unreasonable to have an able-bodied adult staying at home. We know the housewife wasn't idle, but she wasn't earning an income, and that wouldn't be reasonable for a lower class family. The upper class would not work for an income, but her domestic sphere would be taken care of by a full staff. She would have to direct them on what to do, but she did have the ability, and she was afforded her ability to be involved politically, be involved in charities, share her own political musings, things like that. And this kind of idleness afforded her this ability. So then we had the middle class. The domestic sphere required all of her attention. She would not have a full staff to be doing any of the things for her, but she would not need to work for an income. So because of that, she did have some sense of idle time, but she couldn't really contribute to society politically or in ideas or things like that. So this gets us to the idea that every part of Victorian life came back to economics. So this is what I kept coming back to in my research, and I think it is helping me form the conclusion that I came to. So I did set out originally to define the Victorian woman as what she truly was through a series of primary sources. So here's my proposed solution. So the truth of the Victorian woman is based on her class because of how important economics was. So the lower class was a victim of economic circumstance. Even if she wasn't a victim in the traditional sense of what we think of, she was still living her life as a reaction to everything that was happening in the economic world. So she would never live her life without needing to think about or work for money. The upper class, the view that we have of the upper class is pretty realistic, if not overly flattering, because they had the privilege of defining themselves. All the literature that we have, all of the firsthand accounts, all of these things are from upper class women. And then we have the middle class, which is unique and difficult to pin down because it's suspended between the two. It shares from both, but it also had to make its own place in society. So this is the historical relevance I found. It subverts the modern understanding of the period. We thought of the period as very conservative, pretty unchanging. It also reframes how we understand change made during the period. So we understand that suffrage was not fought by the average woman, it was fought by a wealthy woman who wanted to maintain her wealth. So, some more modern relevance in a society where the middle class is still the predominant class. It sets a precedent for understanding of a woman in a world where the class system is so important, so our modern understanding. Also, how the classes interact with each other and how people in different classes, especially women, view each other. There was also some less happy modern relevance in the issues affecting women today and how we understand what motivates the change that is occurring today. So in politics, we have the women in the political sphere that are demonized as overly aggressive and uncaring and not matronly and motherly enough to really care for her people. And then sexuality, the issues with women's health care. Women are having limited access to their own bodies and what they can do with themselves. And then perspective, mothers in the workplace and the tension between women that need to go to work to earn a living, but yet they still have all the expectations of a housewife. So now she is working both of these jobs, which isn't how it was and isn't how the system was set up to exist. So, do you have any questions for me?
In school, he has pursued a wide array of subjects to a high level, focusing especially on math and physics courses. In his extracurricular time, Max has become a member of the Fuser.net Plasma Club, an open consortium of both amateur and professional independent nuclear fusion researchers. He plans to pursue this interest further at Columbia University, where he will study nuclear engineering and dance. Welcome, Max.
Hello. Yay. Thank you, Dr. Kamastra, for that introduction. So, hello, everybody. I am Max Epstein, and today I will not be talking about Victorian women. I will be talking about astrobiology, aliens, and a guy named Frank. So, first of all, though, maybe, who am I? I'm not Frank. I am an O'Neill School senior. I've been at O'Neill since pre-K. I'm a member of the inaugural cohort of the Signature Scholars Research Program, as I'm sure everybody knows, because you're here at the Signature Scholars presentation. I'm intending to major in nuclear engineering, as Dr. Kamastra said, and I'm working on IEC fusion research independently. And pictured above is a nuclear fusion experiment that I was conducting, as well as a telescope that I built last winter break. So when I joined SSRP 2 years ago and wrote my application, there's clearly a lot here that I could have chosen to pursue further in research. And so of these questions that I'm interested in and excited about and going to college for, I obviously chose the entirely unrelated question of, is there life elsewhere in the universe? And although unrelated, on the surface at least, to what I hope to pursue in college and beyond, it is an equally riveting and important question and is considered widely in the scientific community and beyond. So when considering the origins of this question, you have to consider both science fiction and speculative understandings, but you also have to wonder where the initial thought to quantify this came from scientifically. And that came from this guy who is Frank. This is Frank Drake, who was a doctoral scientist at Harvard studying astronomy in the 1960s, and he became one of the first, if not the first, serious scientific mind to pose this question and actually attempt to quantify it. So before his first experiments and his first papers, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence was seen widely to be something that you focused on only after your serious scientific career was over. It was something that people did. Oh. There we go.
Frank's gone.
No, Frank.
Comes back.
Momentarily.
The aliens came already.
Yeah.
Yes, if you just reset.
I know too much. The aliens got rid of me. He's back. So Frank Drake, as has returned, posed this question at a dinner party, actually. And to pose and actually discuss this question not as a, are there aliens out there, what do they look like, what's your favorite science fiction book, but to pose it as a far more serious scientific discussion, he devised what's referred to now as the Drake equation. And so this equation seeks not solely to quantify the theoretical number of alien civilizations, but to exist as a framework through which to discuss the various topics in astronomy, in biology, in sociology, studies in different sorts of technologies that are required to truly attempt to answer this question. It's really at the intersection of all of these different fields. And so what he did is he formulated this equation to be n, the number of detectable alien civilizations, equals the rate of star formation in the Milky Way galaxy, multiplied by the fraction of stars that have planets, multiplied by the number of planets that could theoretically support human life, by the fraction of those planets that could support human life that actually end up developing it, the fraction of that developed life that is intelligent, meaning capable of forming a society, constructing things greater than one singular organism, the fraction of that intelligence that develops detectable communications, and the length of time that those communications could endure, so the longevity of this theoretical civilization. And these 7 topics are widely studied on their own in their foundational questions in their own fields, but when combined, they can answer this question posed by the Drake equation, and the Drake equation serves as a framework through which to combine them. So my research paper that I've been working on seeks to discuss each of these terms individually and then synthesize them together. So that, in a quicker sense, is what I'm excited about doing here. So the first topic, the rate of star formation, and the way that we answer this question, what is the rate of star formation in the galaxy, is by counting. We don't have, or well, we do have very sophisticated ways of counting. We don't simply look at the sky and try to count the number of stars that we can see visually. We have telescopes such as the Hubble Space Telescope above, the new James Webb Space Telescope, the third one, and the Integral Telescope, which is the middle. And these tools that we use and these methods allow us to simply count the number of stars, divide by the length of time, and we can arrive at approximations that begin as rough approximations and then increase in accuracy for the rate of star formation per year in the Milky Way galaxy, which is around between 1 and 3 in many estimations, and some go from 2 to 16, but somewhere in that range, primarily 1 to 3 is the rate of star formation in the galaxy. Beyond that, the fraction of stars with planets, initially we thought of this as very few stars have planets. We thought that our solar system was special because we have many. But that turned out not particularly to be the case. This diagram here from the Exoplanet Orbit database shows an increase in exoplanet discoveries from the 1990s up through 2013. And as you can see, while there were only 1 or 2 or 3 per year early on, by the modern day, we are discovering hundreds of exoplanets per year orbiting different stars or not orbiting a star at all, meaning that the end number that the scientific community has really come to is that practically all stars, if not all stars, have at least a planet orbiting them. The number of planets that could support life is a little bit more difficult to understand, and this is where the scientific community sort of diverges from facts of nature, from understood constants, like this is the number of stars that are formed, this is the number of stars that have planets, to something that's a little bit more up to interpretation, and here's where different diverging groups in the scientific community come to light. And so here, this is a diagram describing the habitable zone, meaning the range of orbits that a planet could be going around a star that could not only maintain liquid water, which is a necessity for life as we know it, but other things such as not too large a temperature gradient between the hottest point and the coldest point, a orbital stability to allow for stability as life is developing. And you can see that for smaller, dimmer, cooler stars, you can have a closer orbit. For larger, hotter, brighter stars, you have to be further away. And you can see that Earth, as denoted in the diagram, falls right in the middle of that range. So beyond that, we now see that the fraction of those planets that could develop life that in fact do. And this becomes a little bit more theoretical because the only planet that we know of that has developed life is Earth, unless there's something one of you isn't telling me. So we have a sample size of 1. So some scientists say, well, the one planet that we know of that could support life does, it's Earth, that fraction is 1. Some scientists say, well, Mars might be able to support life, Venus might be able to support life, we haven't detected it yet, so that fraction is closer to 1/3. And some scientists say there are other exoplanets orbiting other stars that could very well support life. We haven't detected it on those planets, so maybe that fraction is smaller and smaller. And here is just a diagram of the development of life on Earth. And that term is frequently combined, and was combined in my research paper, with the portion of that intelligent life that develops societies, simply because those two are so deeply intertwined, because a study of what might life look like on other planets immediately sort of predicates the discussion of what might that life look like if it continued to evolve? What might a society of that life look like? And so those two terms I have grouped together and are frequently considered alongside each other, even though they're part of separate fields. One solely focused in biology and one more so concerned with sociology as well. And finally, one less than finally, the portion of that life that develops communications technologies. And for this, we mainly consider radio communications, because our ability to image another planet, to take a picture of it and have high enough resolution to, see a city instead of a forest comes a long way after our ability to listen to that planet through our radio communications, whether intentional or unintentional, from potential life. And because that was the journey that we took, and that is the sort of consideration as far as the complexity of that technology, that's what we assume this refers to, or not assume, that's what this does refer to. So pictured here are 2 radio telescopes. The one on your left is the Arecibo telescope that unfortunately suffered a catastrophic failure and collapsed a few years ago, but up until that point was the most powerful radio telescope on Earth. And the other one is the Green Bank telescope, which Frank Drake used in his research to initially start looking for alien civilizations. And I realized that they look about the same size in this picture. The Green Bank telescope pictured here is only around 100 feet in diameter. The Arecibo telescope is much, much bigger. And a person could be standing in that Arecibo telescope in this picture and you would not be able to tell. I use that as an example because I am not 100% sure of the actual diameter. And finally, we consider the length of time that these civilizations would be able to communicate. So how far from the point where we build a radio telescope to the point where it collapses and we don't replace it are we considering? And for this is entirely rooted in sociology and anthropology, and more so in history than in science. And we consider ancient civilizations as a benchmark for this metric. So we think of the potential for if an alien civilization existed, it would potentially follow a similar trajectory to many of ours. And when you consider ancient civilizations such as ancient Egypt, such as the Romans, such as the Mesopotamians, you see that a civilization lasts on average around 300 to 400 years. And so some of the more pessimistic researchers say that that should be the number that we use for L. Some of the more optimistic researchers say, well, that's one specific civilization, but our species hasn't died out. If a modern-day civilization died out, the rest of them would take up the mantle and continue the search for extraterrestrial life. And so that number could be much big, could be larger, could be closer to 1,000, or could be much, much bigger, closer to 10,000, 1 million years, assuming that humanity, evolves and develops and continues forward. And it looks like I have a problem with my presentation. But that is not much of an issue because I will fix it. I'm sorry. Here we go. So one thing that I find to be very interesting about the Drake equation, specifically not just as a mathematical formula, but as a structure through which to talk about this, is the ease with which it facilitates these sorts of conversations. And so what I wanted to do, yes, I have a prop, is I'm going to poll all of you for numbers to plug into our Drake equation, and we'll see what we collectively believe, whether there are many alien civilizations or just a few. So the rate of star formation in the galaxy is relatively well understood, and I won't ask you all to know that off the top of your heads. So I will put in 1, multiplied by the fraction of stars with planets, which is equally well understood, being 1. But now we come to the point where there is a debate, and I've discussed a little bit of it, and I'd like to see what you think. So for the number of planets that could support life per star, any hands? Any questions? Not questions. Any answers? Luke?
0.05.
0.05. Relatively pessimistic, but here we go. Off to a great start. So of those planets that could develop life, that exist in that Goldilocks zone where they can have liquid water, they have a relatively stable orbit, they have a relatively stable rotation, of those, what fraction actually develop life? So from 0 to 1. Tyler? 0.1. Equally pessimistic. Okay. I gave this a similar presentation to a group of 5th graders, and they tried to give me 5. So we are moving along. So of those that develop life, how much is intelligent? Audrey? 0.6, following a trend. So of that life that's developed, how much is intelligent? How much can develop something like communication, societies, tools, things like that? Amy? 0.02. Wow. I have a guess as to whether or not we believe in aliens. The fraction of intelligent life and civilizations that actually are detectable, that intend to communicate. Anyone? Kevin? 0.01. Wow. And finally, the really existential one, the length of time that a civilization could last. If one of you says 1 year, I'm not going to put it. Charlotte? 750. Thank you for derailing all of this. 750 million. So when I press enter, who do I want to cold call? Dr. Camastro. Could you read out that number? Which number? The bottom one. 45. So we believe that, mostly thanks to Charlotte, that there are 35 detectable alien civilizations in our Milky Way galaxy. So that's still a really small number. Now, it's bigger than the 1.26 that I was given from the presentation that I gave to the school earlier today, but it's much, much smaller than some of the approximations given by scientists that range from around 4 million to around 150 million, is a sort of consortium of scientists that represent the many Earth theory, the theory that life is precious and valuable, but not necessarily unique in the galaxy. It more so closely follows the rare Earth group of scientists who believe that life is such a assertion of random chance and really, really low likelihoods for all of these different things that it's very unlikely that there are many civilizations out there. So that discussion of alien life sort of immediately requires a discussion of what might it look like. And from there, many scientists look to the Kardashev scale. Now, this was proposed after Frank Drake, after the search for extraterrestrial life became a little bit more well-established and became better respected in the scientific community. And this ranks civilizations from type 1 to type 3. A type 1 civilization being one capable of harnessing the energy of its home planet, and a type 3 civilization being capable of harnessing the collective energy of its entire galaxy. So a type 1 looks relatively similar to us. We are right now, depending on definition, between a type 0.7 and 0.8. So we can harness the majority of the energy from our planet through oil, through coal, natural gas, but also nuclear, hydroelectric, solar, things like that. But a type 1 civilization that can harness all of that energy would likely look relatively similar to us as far as the way that its people interact, the way that its language looks, its culture, its art, its level of scientific understanding of the world. A type 2 civilization, on the other hand, would be more similar to something that we see in lots of modern science fiction. Now, of course, Star Wars, as I have up here a picture of the Death Star, is very scientifically inaccurate. It is a very loose science fiction. But looking at the technologies that they have, abilities from ships to travel almost like it's with no effort between planets or between solar systems, the ability to construct weapons that can harness enough energy to destroy whole planets, the ability to harness that energy and that understanding of the world that they have is relatively foreign to us, and that's why we have to conceive of these ideas through science fiction and not through something like scientific papers or things like that. And that's what a type 2 civilization might look like. A type 3 civilization, on the other hand, is arguably almost entirely unknowable to us. These civilizations would contain or would have the ability to harness the entire power of solar systems similar to how we use batteries, with the same level of sort of laissez-faire, I'll put batteries into my remote, I'll put a star into my computer sort of thing. These civilizations would have an understanding of the world and its and scientific abilities that far outpace anything that we can even think of in anything but the most speculative of science fiction. Beings of a type 3 civilization may not be intelligent or look like that in any way that we could reasonably recognize, and yet they're still valuable to consider and understand with the search for extraterrestrial life. And given the Drake equation and various numbers and things like that, it forces us to consider that we could very well be alone. We could very well be the only planet out there. And it's all well and good to have the Kardashev scale and have conceptions of these alien life, but it doesn't exist. We're the only ones. And our number, although it's 35, is a bit of a rounding error away from 0.45. It's something that, if there are 35 other civilizations, the Milky Way is huge. It's very likely that it would be a long time before we even are able to make contact. So for all intents and purposes, this group here believes that we are alone. Alternatively, there could be thousands, if not millions, of other civilizations out there. The Milky Way could be brimming with life, and we simply haven't detected it yet. And that's where Drake equation numbers that are around 1 million, 5 million, 100 million sort of come into the discussion, and where scientists such as Neil deGrasse Tyson and Carl Sagan, who entertain, if not fully believe, these discussions, sort of fall. And that question of, if there are millions of aliens out there, where are they, is referred to as the Fermi paradox. And when considering, here's a picture of our Milky Way galaxy. When considering the Fermi paradox and potential answers to that, scientists have come to an understanding of something that they refer to as great filters. Now, these are seen as something in the development of a civilization that is an inhibitor to it being detected as the Drake equation says that it should be. Now, these filters could be things behind us, such as the development from molecules and carbon to microbes that simulate life. This could be from single-celled organisms to multicellular organisms. This could be from intelligent beings to intelligent beings with communication or with civilization. Or this great filter could be ahead of us. This great filter could be something contemporary, such as mutually assured nuclear destruction. This could be something such as catastrophic results from climate change. This could even be something entirely out of our control, such as meteor impact wiping out life. And we have no way of knowing whether that great filter is ahead or behind us. But when we consider this diagram, that this charts the number of detected alien civilizations with the fraction of planets that have life and the fraction of inhabited planets that want to communicate. And if both of these numbers are very, very low, well, then there's our answer to the Fermi paradox. The great filter is something that's behind us. It's very hard for life to even get off the ground. We're safe, but we're alone. If you look at the top corner in the red, that shows the great filter is behind us, and there are lots of alien civilizations out there. We're safe, and we have lots of potential friends. We haven't detected them yet. So if you look in this bottom corner, where all of them combine, you see the situation that we may be in now, where the chances of life forming are relatively high, and yet we can't detect it. We know we can't detect it, and so there must be some unthought of or not yet encountered great filter ahead of us. And that great filter could be tomorrow, it could be in 10 years, 1,000 years, 100,000 years. But as our technology progresses and as our ability to broadcast ourselves out there progresses, if alongside our ability to detect and be detected increases, but the number of civilizations that we detect remains constant at 0, then it becomes more and more likely that the great filter is rapidly approaching, because if we are reaching the point where any alien civilization out there would have to be blind not to see us, and we can't see any of them, then there must be a barrier around where we are that is inhibiting those other civilizations from detecting us. And so that leaves us with a lot of questions, a lot of things that aren't fully understood, but also with a sort of understanding and reality that either life is incredibly precious and unique and unlikely that there is anything that we could understand as intelligence out there other than us, and therefore life is incredibly precious, or the universe is brimming with life, but there's some existential filter that it rapidly approaches. And when we consider the modern day, when we consider the threats that we face as a society that we are considering, such as nuclear assured destruction, the threats of world wars, global warming, societal unrest, these sort of existential problems that sometimes we tend to look away from, something as out there and sort of almost science fiction as astrobiology, aliens, and a guy named Frank, ends up becoming rather important to consider, because if we haven't detected any alien civilizations out there, and we see that we are approaching lots of problems and unrest, we should really take a chance at looking in ourselves and say, if these great filters are real, if they are approaching, What can we do as young people, as high schoolers, as people who support schools, or as parents, as grandparents, as members of a society? What can we do, considering these threats of filters, what can we do to safeguard our own society against them? Thank you.